Welcome to Midnight Truth, where peaceful stories guide you into the perfect night's rest. Before we start, take a moment to like this video and subscribe. It helps me bring more soothing stories to you and others who need them. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is for you. Now, find your cozy spot, close your eyes, and let's begin this calming journey together. I never thought I'd end up in a place like this. After the divorce finalized last month, I needed a fresh start, something affordable and quiet where I could piece my life back together. That's how I found myself standing in front of 43 Blackwood Lane, a sprawling Victorian house that looked like it had been plucked straight out of a Gothic novel. The real estate agent called it charming. But charming wasn't the first word that came to mind as I stared at its peeling paint and crooked shutters. The house sat at the end of a long, winding driveway, surrounded by ancient oak trees whose branches reached toward the roof like skeletal fingers. Its 3 stories loomed above me, windows glinting in the late afternoon sun like watchful eyes. A wraparound porch sagged slightly in the middle, and the front door stained glass panel depicted some kind of floral pattern that seemed more ominous than welcoming. Inside, the air smelled of old wood and something faintly metallic. The floorboards groaned under my weight as I stepped into the foyer, their sound echoing through the cavernous space. My footsteps were accompanied by the gentle ticking of an antique grandfather clock in the corner, a piece I hadn't noticed in the photos online. The wallpaper was faded, but still showed traces of what must have once been an elegant damask pattern. Everything about the place felt heavy, as if the walls themselves carried the weight of decades. The kitchen, while outdated, had good bones, solid wooden cabinets that creaked when opened, a farmhouse sink that looked original to the house, and an old stove that actually worked. Upstairs, the master bedroom featured a bay window with a view of the overgrown backyard, though the glass was warped with age, making everything outside appear slightly distorted. 2 smaller bedrooms flanked it, perfect for guests who probably wouldn't be visiting anytime soon. What sold me on the place, beyond the price that was practically unheard of for this area, was the study. It had built-in bookshelves that lined 3 walls, a large desk positioned perfectly to catch the morning light, and French doors leading to a small balcony. As a freelance writer, I could already picture myself working here, coffee steaming in my favorite mug while rain pattered against the windows. That first night, as I lay in bed listening to the house settle around me, I told myself the noises were normal. Every old house made sound, right? The occasional creak of wood contracting in the cool night air, the soft sigh of wind through cracks in the window frames. Nothing to worry about, just the house adjusting to having someone living in it again after who knows how long. At least that's what I kept telling myself as I drifted off to sleep, the unfamiliar darkness pressing against my eyelids. The next morning brought sunlight streaming through the warped glass of my bedroom window, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. I spent the day unpacking boxes, each item carrying memories I wasn't sure I want to keep. The house seemed to swallow sound whole. My footsteps barely registered on the thick carpet in the upstairs hallway, and even the clattered dishes in the kitchen sounded muffled, as if the walls were absorbing every noise. By late afternoon, curiosity got the better of me. I decided to explore the neighborhood, starting with the small convenience store 2 blocks away. As I walked down the cracked sidewalk, I couldn't help noticing how few people were out and about. The streetlights flickered to life prematurely, casting long shadows across manicured lawns and neatly trimmed hedges. Everything appeared perfectly normal, yet there was an underlying stillness that felt almost unnatural. At the store, I picked up some essentials: milk, bread, coffee, and was waiting in line when an elderly woman approached me. Her hair was steel gray, pulled back in a severe bun, and her eyes seemed to pierce right through me. "You must be the new tenant at the Blackwood house," she said, her voice carrying a strange mixture of curiosity and something else I couldn't quite place. Before I could respond, she continued, "I'm Mrs. Hargrove from number 45. Lived here all my life." She gestured vaguely toward the register, and the young clerk quickly rang up my items. "That house has history. Some say it's cursed." Her laugh was too sharp, too forced. "Of course, I don't believe in such nonsense." As she spoke, a chill ran down my spine despite the warmth of the store. "Cursed?" I managed to ask, try and keep my tone light. Mrs. Hargrove leaned closer, lowering her voice. Back in the 70s, a family lived there, the Thompsons. They disappeared one night, just vanished. Doors locked, windows intact. Police searched for weeks but found nothing except. She paused, looking around as if checking for eavesdroppers. Well, let's just say they found things that didn't make sense. Children's toys arranged in patterns. Symbols drawn in salt on the floors. Her words sent a shiver through me, though I tried to dismiss it as local superstition. But that was decades ago. I said, forcing a smile. Houses like that often get rumors attached to them. The old woman nodded slowly, but her eyes remained intense. True enough, though I do recall another tenant, maybe 10 years back. Young couple. They lasted 2 months before they ran out screaming about voices in the walls. Said the house changed while they slept. She shook her head, stepping back. Just be careful, dear. Some places hold on to their past tighter than others. Walking home, the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch impossibly far. I couldn't shake Mrs. Hargrove's words from my mind, nor the way her voice had trembled slightly when mentioning the voices in the walls. The familiar creak of the front gate opening sounded louder than before, and as I stepped inside, the house seemed different somehow, darker, heavier, as if it were holding its breath. That night, lying in bed, I listened to usual settling noises with new awareness. Was that just the house adjusting, or something more? The grandfather clock ticked steadily in the distance, each second echoing through the silence. For the first time since moving in, I found myself wishing for traffic noise or distant sirens. Anything to break the oppressive quiet that seemed to press against my ears. My phone buzzed on a nightstand, startling me. A text from my sister. How's the new place? I stared at the screen, fingers hovering over the keyboard. How could I explain what I couldn't fully understand myself? Finally, I typed back simply, "It's quiet. Too quiet," I thought as I set the phone down, watching the screen fade to black. The darkness felt thicker tonight, wrapping around me like a heavy blanket. I told myself it was just my imagination running wild after Mrs. Hargrove's story. But when I closed my eyes, I couldn't shake the feeling that the house was listening, waiting for me to fall asleep. The first few nights passed without incident, though I caught myself jumping at every little sound. The furnace kicking on, branches scraping against windows, even the occasional car driving by. Each morning, I convinced myself I was just being paranoid, that any new environment takes time to adjust to. But on the fourth night, something changed. I had just settled into bed when I heard it. A distinct creak from downstairs, different from the usual settling noises. This sound had purpose, like measured steps crossing the living room floor. My heart thudded in my chest as I strained to listen. Another creak followed, then silence. I told myself it was just the house expanding and contracting with the night's cooler temperatures. But deep down, I knew better. The next morning, I examined the living room carefully, searching for any signs of intrusion. Nothing seemed disturbed. No footprints on the dusty floor, no furniture moved. Yet the memory of those deliberate footsteps lingered in my mind throughout the day. I mentioned it casually to Mrs. Hargrove when she stopped by unannounced, bringing a plate of cookies that smelled faintly of cinnamon. "The footsteps are always the first sign," she said, setting the plate on my kitchen counter. Her hands trembled slightly as she smoothed her apron. First, they walk where they used to live. Then, she trailed off, staring at the floor. "Never mind. Probably just your imagination." Her words haunted me more than the footsteps themselves. That night, I went to bed earlier than usual, determined to stay awake and catch whatever was making those sounds. Around midnight, I heard them again, slower this time, more deliberate. They started in the living room, moved to the dining room, then paused. The silence that followed was worse than the footsteps themselves. Suddenly, a cold draft swept through the room. I could see my breath in the moonlight streaming through the window. The temperature dropped rapidly, and I felt goosebumps rise on my arms. The sensation was localized, concentrated near the foot of my bed. I reached for my phone to check the time, 12:37 a.m., but the screen stayed dark. No matter how many times I pressed the power button, It refused to turn on. Then came the whispers. So soft at first, I thought I was imagining them, like distant voices carried on the wind. They grew louder, more insistent, though I couldn't make out any words. The sound seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, filling the room with an oppressive presence. My heart pounded so loudly I was sure the entire house could hear it. I threw off the covers and stumbled to the hallway, hoping to escape whatever was happening in my bedroom. The whispers followed me, bouncing off the walls, growing louder with each step I took. The cold spot moved with me, an icy presence that seemed to breathe down my neck. I reached the top of the stairs and froze. The grandfather clock in the foyer had stopped ticking, its hands frozen at 12:37. For what felt like hours, I stood there, paralyzed by fear and confusion. When the whispers finally began to fade, I retreated to the study, locking the door behind me. The room felt warmer, safer somehow. I curled up in the armchair, wrapping myself in a blanket, and waited for dawn to break. Sleep was impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw shadowy figures moving just beyond my field of vision. The following days were filled with nervous energy. I jumped at every sound, avoided going upstairs alone, and found myself constantly looking over my shoulder. The house seemed to mock my fear. Floorboards creaked louder, doors slammed shut on their own, and the smell of damp earth became more pronounced. It was as if the building itself was alive, responding to my terror. I tried to rationalize everything. Perhaps there was a draft causing the cold spots. Maybe the whispers were just the wind through the eaves. But deep down, I knew these explanations fell short. Something was wrong with this house. Something beyond natural explanation. And worst of all, it seemed to be getting stronger, more confident in its manifestations. Each night brought new terrors. One evening, I woke to find my sheets soaked with ice-cold water, though the ceiling showed no signs of leakage. Another time, I discovered all the books in the study rearranged, stacked in perfect towers that formed a crude spiral pattern on the floor. The metallic smell that had greeted me on my first day now permeated every room, growing stronger with each passing night. Despite my growing fear, I couldn't bring myself to leave. There was something compelling about the house, something that drew me in even as it terrified me. Maybe it was a challenge of uncovering its secrets, or perhaps it was simply the stubborn refusal to let fear conquer me. Whatever the reason, I stayed, documenting each occurrence in a notebook, hoping that writing them down would make them seem less real, more manageable. But the house had other plans. Late one night, as I sat at my desk in the study, I felt something touch my shoulder. The contact was light, almost gentle, but unmistakably real. I spun around, heart racing, but saw nothing. The room was empty, the door still locked from the inside, yet the sensation remained, a presence hovering just out of sight, watching me with unseen eyes. The next morning, driven by equal parts curiosity and desperation, I decided to dig deeper into the house's past. The local library proved surprisingly helpful. Its aging librarian, a wiry man named Mr. Whitmore, practically salivating at the prospect of research. "The Blackwood house?" he repeated, his eyes lighting up behind thick glasses. "Oh, you've certainly chosen an interesting subject." He led me to a dusty corner of the archives, pulling out yellowed newspaper clippings and brittle property records. The house had been built in 1892 by Ezekiel Blackwood, a wealthy industrialist with a reputation for eccentricity. Photographs showed him as a gaunt figure with piercing eyes, always dressed in dark suits that seemed to blend into the shadows behind him. According to the records, Blackwood had lost his entire family, wife and 3 children, to a mysterious illness within a single year of moving into the house. But it was what happened afterward that truly chilled me. Blackwood had transformed the basement into some sort of private sanctuary, installing heavy iron doors and soundproofing the walls. Neighbors reported strange lights burning in the windows at all hours, and an increase in deliveries of unusual items, rare herbs, crystals, books written in languages no one could identify. The most disturbing detail came from a handwritten journal entry by a local minister who claimed to have witnessed Blackwood performing rituals in the woods behind the house, chanting a language that sounded like wind through dead leaves. Mr. Whitmore became increasingly agitated as we delved deeper, constantly glancing over his shoulder as if expecting someone to appear. There were rumors, he whispered, sliding a particularly fragile document across the table. Blackwood believed he could communicate with something beyond our world. He called it the Great Whisper, said it spoke to him through the house itself. The document was a police report from 1903, detailing the discovery of Blackwood's body in the basement. He had apparently hung himself on one of the support beams, but what caught my attention were the officer's notes in the margin. Room filled with strange symbols. Air felt charged like before a storm. Couldn't stay long. Headaches, nausea. Something felt wrong. As I pieced together the timeline, a pattern emerged. Every few decades, tenants would move in, only to leave abruptly after reporting supernatural occurrences. The Thompson family's disappearance in the 70s suddenly made more sense in this context. They weren't the first to vanish, nor would they be the last. Property records showed numerous attempts to sell the house, each falling through at the last minute due to buyer's remorse or unforeseen circumstances. Most chilling of all was a series of letters between Blackwood and various occult practitioners throughout the country. In them, he described developing a technique to anchor spirits to a physical location, creating what he called a resonance chamber. The house itself was designed to amplify and contain these energies, with each room serving a specific purpose in his rituals. The study, where I now spent most of my time, was referred to as the focusing chamber, while the basement was cryptically labeled as a threshold room. The librarian's hands shook as he helped me gather the documents. "I shouldn't have shown you these," he muttered, avoiding my gaze. "Some things are best left buried." His warning echoed in my mind as I left the library, the weight of the information pressing heavily on my shoulders. That night, armed with my newfound knowledge, I explored the house with different eyes. The symbols Mrs. Hargrove had mentioned, I now recognized them as protection runes, crudely drawn in salt by desperate tenants trying to ward off whatever lurked in the shadows. The metallic smell was stronger in certain areas, particularly near the baseboards in the study and along the staircase. Even the grandfather clock seemed significant now, its intricate carvings matching designs I'd seen in Blackwood's correspondence. In the attic, I discovered something that made my blood run cold. A hidden compartment behind a false wall containing a collection of leather-bound journals. Their pages were filled with Blackwood's spidery handwriting, detailing his experiments and observations. One passage stood out, written in shaky letters. "The whisper grows stronger. It knows I am here. Sometimes when the house is quiet, I think I can feel it moving to the walls, testing the barriers I have created. What have I done?" As I read through the journals, a terrible realization dawned on me. Blackwood hadn't just opened a door to the supernatural. He had built a prison, trapping something ancient and powerful within the very structure of the house. And now, with each passing night, that prison was weakening. The cold spots, the whispers, the rearranged objects, these weren't random hauntings. They were symptoms of something far more sinister breaking free. Something shifted in the house after I found Blackwood's journals. It was as if the mere act of reading them had awakened something dormant, stirring it from its century-long slumber. The changes began subtly. The metallic smell intensified, clinging to my clothes even when I left the house. The whispers, once sporadic and distant, became constant companions, murmuring just below the threshold of comprehension no matter where I went. In the study, where I spent most of my waking hours poring over the journals, the transformations were most pronounced. The air grew heavier, almost liquid in its density, making each breath feel like drawing in wet cement. The French doors to the balcony developed a persistent draft, though no matter how tightly I sealed them, the cold air continued to seep through. Frost began forming on the inside of the glass panes, delicate patterns that spelled out words in a language I couldn't read but somehow understood instinctively. Warnings. The books on the shelves rearranged themselves nightly, forming patterns that matched diagrams in Blackwood's journals. Historical tomes mingled with modern paperbacks to create sigils and protective circles, only to dissolve back into chaos by morning. The grandfather clock's ticking became erratic, sometimes racing forward, other times slowing to an almost imperceptible crawl. On several occasions, I caught glimpses of shadowy figures reflected in its glass face. Tall, thin shapes that disappear when I turn to look directly at them. One afternoon, as I sat at the desk transcribing passages from the journals, I felt something brush against my hand. Looking down, I saw words appearing on the blank page of my notebook, written in elegant, flowing script. "Leave while you still can," it read, the ink seeming to seep directly from the paper's surface. My pen hovered above the page, trembling slightly as I debated whether to respond. Before I could decide, the words dissolved into the paper, leaving behind only faint water stains. The study's behavior grew more aggressive. Books flew from the shelves without warning, narrowly missing my head. The desk chair would spin violently when I stood up, sometimes continuing to rotate even after I left the room. Most disturbing was the sensation of being watched, not just from the corners of the room, but from within the walls themselves. The plaster seemed to pulse gently, like skin stretched too tight over muscle and bone. I began keeping detailed records of these occurrences, noting patterns and frequencies. The activity peaked between midnight and 3 a.m., exactly matching the time frame documented in Blackwood's final entries. During these hours, the study transformed completely. The air grew icy cold, electrical devices failed, and the shadows lengthened unnaturally, pooling in the corners like spilled ink. Once, I caught movement in my peripheral vision and turned to see what appeared to be a human figure made entirely of darkness, its form shifting and writhing like smoke caught in a breeze. The room's response to my presence became increasingly personal. My favorite pen would disappear only to reappear hours later, filled with ink that smelled of burnt metal. The chair cushion would retain my body's impression long after I'd left, as if something invisible was sitting in my place. Most unsettling was the way the room seemed to anticipate my movements, lights dimming as I entered, papers rustling before I reached for them, the air pressure changing fractionally before I made decisions. One night, unable to sleep, I returned to the study at 2:47 a.m. The room felt different immediately. The air was thick with static electricity, raising the hairs on my arms. The books were arranged in a perfect circle around the desk, their spines facing inward. Sitting down, I felt resistance, as if the chair didn't want to be occupied. When I opened Blackwood's main journal, the pages flipped themselves open to a section I hadn't read before. The handwriting was different, frantic, jagged, as if written in great haste. They're learning. The barriers are failing. Can feel it in the walls, in the floorboards. The whisper isn't content anymore. It wants out. It knows I'm weak. Tonight, I'll finish the ritual. If this journal survives me, know this. The house is alive. It remembers everything. It watches everything. Don't trust the mirrors. Don't trust your reflection. As I read these words, the mirror above the fireplace, which I'd never noticed before, fogged up despite the room's freezing temperature. Words began to form in the condensation. Help me. The letters were backward, as if written from the other side of the glass. Before I could react, the mirror shattered, sending shards flying across the room. I ducked instinctively, but when I looked up, the pieces were suspended in midair, hanging like deadly mobiles. They began to vibrate, creating the study's walls started to pulse more noticeably, rippling like water. Shadows detached themselves from the corners, coalescing into humanoid shapes that press against the room's boundaries. The books levitated from their circle, spinning wildly before slamming back into the shelves. Through it all, the whispers grew louder, more insistent, until they formed coherent words. Join us. Join us. Join US. I fled the room, but the house seemed to resist my escape. The hallway stretched impossibly long, the doors of other rooms vanishing as I ran. The grandfather clocks ticking echoed through the space, each chime resonating in my bones. Behind me, I could hear the study's door slam shut with finality, followed by an unearthly scream that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. When I finally reached my bedroom and locked the door, I realized I was still clutching Blackwood's journal. The pages were warm to the touch, and new words were appearing in the margins. My own handwriting, though I hadn't written them. It's in the walls, they read. It's in the foundation. It's in you. The basement door had always been there, of course. A heavy oak slab at the end of the hallway, reinforced with iron bands that gleamed dully in the dim light. But after my encounter in the study, it seemed to call to me, its presence impossible to ignore. The air around it vibrated with suppressed energy, and the metallic smell was strongest here, almost overpowering. My rational mind screamed at me to leave well enough alone, but something deeper, some primal curiosity, or perhaps something more sinister, compelled me forward. The key hung where Blackwood's journals said it would be, concealed behind a loose brick in the fireplace. It felt warm in my hand, vibrating slightly as if charged with electricity. When I inserted it into the lock, the mechanism clicked with unexpected ease, as though the door had been waiting for this moment. The hinges didn't creak as I pushed it open. Instead, they emitted a low harmonic hum that resonated through my chest. A staircase descended into darkness, each step releasing a puff of ancient, musty air. The walls were lined with symbols carved deep into the stone, some matching those in Blackwood's journals, others completely unfamiliar. As I descended, the temperature dropped dramatically, and my breath missed in the beam of my flashlight. The light seemed reluctant to penetrate the darkness, casting weak, trembling pools that barely illuminated the steps ahead. At the bottom, the space opened into a vast chamber that defied the house's apparent dimensions. Support beams crisscrossed the ceiling, each wrapped in chains that ended in heavy padlocks. The floor was a mosaic of stones arranged in complex patterns, spirals within circles within pentagrams. In the center stood an altar made of black marble, its surface etched with runes that glowed faintly red in the darkness. Around the room, cages hung from the ceiling, each containing objects that seemed to shift and change when viewed directly. A doll that appeared to have too many limbs, a mirror that reflected scenes rather than images, a music box that played silent melodies. The air was thick with the scent of earth and something metallic, like blood. My flashlight flickered erratically, and when it finally died, I realized the room was already growing lighter, not from any visible source, but from the glowing runes and symbols that covered every surface. They pulsed in rhythm with the house's breathing, which I could now feel clearly, like the steady expansion and contraction of giant lungs. Against one wall, I found what appeared to be Blackwood's workbench, covered in dust and cobwebs. It held implements that made my stomach churn, scalpels with blades that seemed to twist in the light, jars containing unidentifiable substances that bubbled despite the cold, books bound in materials that looked suspiciously like human skin. Among these items lay a leather portfolio, its contents remarkably well preserved. Inside were detailed blueprints of the house, showing chambers and passages that didn't exist in reality, or at least not in the reality I knew. Notes explained how each room served as a node in a complex network designed to trap, and contained something referred to only as the whisper. Mathematical equations covered the margins, calculations involving dimensions, and angles that made no sense to my rational mind. One page contained a list of dates, all corresponding to times when previous tenants had either disappeared or fled the house. The most disturbing discovery was a series of photographs mounted on the wall opposite the altar. They showed different families posing in various rooms of the house. The Thompsons from the 70s, the young couple Mrs. Hargrove had mentioned, others whose faces triggered vague memories from my research. In each picture, something was wrong. Eyes reflecting light from impossible angles, shadows falling the wrong direction, figures standing just behind the smiling families that weren't visible to the naked eye. As I examined these artifacts, the room began to change around me. The chains on the support beams rattled softly, though there was no breeze. The stone patterns on the floor shifted, reforming into new configurations every time I looked away. The cages swayed gently, their content becoming more defined. The doll now clearly had 6 arms. The mirror showed scenes of people screaming in terror. The music box emitted a sound like distant thunder. The altar began to emit a soft, pulsing glow, and I felt drawn to it despite every instinct screaming at me to flee. As I approached, words formed in the air above it, written in the same backward script I'd seen in the study's mirror. "You are the key." The realization hit me like a physical blow. The house wasn't just haunted. It was using me, feeding off my presence, strengthening itself through my investigation. Behind me, the staircase disappeared, replaced by smooth stone wall. The symbols carved into the surfaces began to glow brighter, their light casting strange shadows that moved independently of their sources. The air grew heavier, pressing against my chest like a physical weight. From the darkness beyond the light's reach came a sound. Not the whispering I had grown accustomed to, but a deep, resonant voice that seemed to come from everywhere at once. "You've seen enough," it said, though the words didn't reach my ears so much as imprint themselves directly into my mind. "Now you understand. The barrier weakens. Soon I will be free. And you will be my vessel." I backed away from the altar, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. The room responded to my fear, the walls closing in slightly, the symbols glowing brighter still. The photographs on the wall began to ripple, the trapped figures reaching toward me, their mouths forming silent screams. The object in the cages rattled violently, their contents straining against invisible bonds. Desperation gave me strength. I lunged for the workbench, grabbing anything I could find. A scalpel, a jar of bubbling liquid, a handful of papers. The room reacted violently, the floor bucking beneath my feet, the air becoming so thick it was difficult to breathe. As I reached the spot where the staircase had been, I hurled the items at the wall, shouting words from Blackwood's journal that had stuck in my mind. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. The symbols flared bright white, the chains on the support beams snapping with deafening cracks. The cages shattered, releasing their contents into the room. The photographs burst into flame, their trapped figures dissolving into ash. The altar split down the middle, revealing a void so absolute it seemed to drink in the light itself. From this void came a roar that shook the foundations of the house, followed by a blast of freezing air that knocked me off my feet. As I scrambled toward what I prayed was safety, I felt something brush against my mind. Not hostile, but curious, like a predator examining its prey. It left behind an image, burned into my consciousness. The house, but changed, its windows dark and empty, its doors sealed shut. The days following my descent into the basement blurred together in a haze of paranoia and exhaustion. I barricaded myself in the study, surrounded myself with Blackwood's journals and my own notes, desperately searching for a solution. The house had become a living entity, its presence suffocating in its intensity. The walls seemed to breathe in sync with my own panicked heartbeat, and the air carried a constant electric charge that made my skin prickle. Sleep became impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the void from the basement, felt its hungry gaze probing my mind. The whispers had evolved into distinct voices, overlapping in a cacophony of languages I couldn't understand yet somehow comprehended. They pleaded, threatened, promised unimaginable horrors. My reflection in any mirror showed dark circles under my eyes that grew darker each day, my face becoming gaunt and hollow-eyed. The study itself had transformed into something alien. The books rearranged themselves constantly, forming patterns that shifted faster than I could document. The desk chair spun violently at random intervals, sometimes knocking over lamps or sending papers flying. The French doors developed cracks in their glass, through which I occasionally caught glimpses of impossible landscapes. Skies filled with too many moons, forests where trees grew downward into endless voids. I began experiencing blackouts. Hours would disappear without explanation, leaving me disoriented and nauseous. Once, I woke up in the attic surrounded by dolls I didn't remember collecting, their glass eyes reflecting scenes from Blackwood's photographs. Another time, I found myself in the garden, digging frantically at the base of an oak tree, though I couldn't recall why I was there or what I was searching for. My hands were raw and bleeding, and when I washed in the kitchen sink, the water ran black for nearly 20 minutes. The house played tricks on my perception. Staircases would lead to different floors than expected. Rooms would change size and shape overnight, and distances between spaces became inconsistent. The grandfather clock's hands spun erratically, sometimes moving backward, other times skipping hours altogether. Time itself seemed to warp within the house's walls, stretching and compressing in ways that defied logic. My research uncovered potential solutions, a ritual Blackwood had documented but never completed. It required gathering specific items from each room's node point and performing a ceremony at the exact moment when the house's dimensional barriers were weakest. The catch was that the ritual demanded a sacrifice, something living, something connected to house. The implications of this requirement gnawed at my sanity, but I couldn't see any other way out. The items proved difficult to obtain. From the kitchen, I needed a knife that had tasted blood. I found one buried in the garden, its blade stained rust red. The living room yielded a music box that played no discernible tune but caused plants to wither in its presence. The master bedroom provided a mirror that showed reflection from 24 hours ago, capturing moments I couldn't remember. Each item fought against being taken, the house throwing tantrums that grew increasingly violent. The attic revealed the most disturbing artifact, a child's teddy bear who first seemed to grow longer when touched, its button eyes tracking my movements even when I wasn't looking at it. Removing it from its shelf caused the entire house to shake violently, plaster raining down from the ceiling. I'd barely escaped with it clutched in my chest, pursued by what felt like dozens of unseen hands trying to pull it away. As I gathered these components, the house's hostility escalated. The cold spots became Arctic zones that froze moisture in the air, creating floating crystals that cut like razors. The whispers manifested physically, forming pressure points on my skin that left bruises shaped like strange symbols. Objects throughout the house began to decay rapidly, with rotting, metal rusting, fabrics unraveling, except for the artifacts I collected, which seemed to grow stronger and more vibrant. The final item required was something of myself, a lock of hair, a drop of blood, a fingernail. When I provided these willingly, the house screamed in rage, its walls bleeding black ichor that smelled of burnt sugar and decay. The study's windows shattered simultaneously, though no glass touched the ground. It simply vanished mid-air. The desk chair exploded into splinters, and the books caught fire spontaneously, their flames producing no heat but consuming the pages instantly. Through it all, I clung to the hope that the ritual would work, that I could undo what Blackwood had started. But deep down, I knew the truth. The house had marked me as its own. The void from the basement had left its mark on my soul. And no matter what happened next, I would never be free of its influence. The grandfather clock struck midnight, its chimes reverberating through the house like funeral bells. I stood in the center of the study, the collected artifacts arranged in a precise circle around me. The air crackled with anticipation, the house holding its breath as if aware of what was about to happen. My hands trembled as I lit the 5 black candles, their flames burning an unnatural shade of green that cast sickly shadows on the walls. The ritual began with words from Blackwood's journal, spoken in a language that twisted my tongue and burned my throat. Each syllable seemed to tear at the fabric of reality, making the room waver like a mirage. The artifact responded immediately. The bloody knife floated upward, spinning slowly, its rust-red stain spreading across the ceiling like spilled wine. The music box began to play its silent melody, causing the candle's flames to dance erratically. The mirror showed my reflection, but it wasn't alone. Behind me stood shadowy figures, the families from the photographs, their faces contorted in silent screams. They reached toward me, their hands passing through the glass as if it were water. The teddy bear's fur grew longer still, tangling around my ankles like grasping roots. Its button eyes glowed red, and I could feel its weight increasing, becoming unbearable. The house itself joined the ritual, its walls pulsing in time with my recitation. Plaster cracked and fell away, revealing veins of black crystal beneath the surface. The symbols carved into the basement walls appeared on every surface, glowing brighter with each passing second. The metallic smell became overwhelming, and I tasted copper in the back of my throat. As I reached the ritual's climax, the void from the basement manifested in the center of the room. It was an empty space. Rather, it was filled with writhing darkness, like a nest of shadow serpents. From this mass emerged a form, taking shape gradually. It was humanoid but wrong, too tall, too thin, with too many joints bending in impossible directions. Its skin seemed to flow like liquid mercury, reflecting everything and nothing at the same time. The entity's presence crushed the air from my lungs. I fell to my knees, struggling to continue the incantation. The artifact began to resonate, emitting a high-pitched whine that made my teeth ache. The music box's silent melody became audible, a discordant symphony that seemed to peel away layers of reality. The candle's green flames leapt higher, merging into a single column of fire that didn't burn but radiated cold. You cannot banish what you have invited in. The entity's voice boomed, not through my ears, but directly into my mind. Its words carried images, flashes of other houses, other victims, an endless cycle of imprisonment and escape. I saw Blackwood's final moments, his body twisting unnaturally as the entity consumed him. I saw the Thompson family, their bodies preserved in the void, still screaming silently. The ritual demanded completion. With shaking hands, I reached the final component, the lock of my own hair, now writhing like a living thing. As I tossed it into the void, the house convulsed violently. The floor buckled, walls collapsed inward, and the ceiling cracked open to reveal not sky but endless darkness. The entity roared, its form splitting into multiple copies of itself, each reaching toward me with too many fingered hands. Pain exploded in my chest as something tore free from my body, a tendril of darkness that writhed and twisted before dissolving into the void. The artifacts shattered simultaneously, their fragments hovering in the air before being sucked into the entity's mass. The study's walls bled black ichor, the liquid evaporating before it could touch the floor. The grandfather clock's hand spun wildly before freezing at 3:37 a.m. The entity hesitated, its forms merging back into one. For a moment, I thought the ritual had worked, that I had succeeded where Blackwood had failed. But then it spoke. Again, its voice carrying a terrible understanding. You have only delayed the inevitable. The house remembers. It always remembers. With that, the void collapsed inward, pulling the entity back into the basement with a sound like tearing fabric. The house shuddered violently, plaster and with groaning, as if the structure itself were in pain. The artifact's fragments fell to the floor, their power spent, leaving behind only ordinary objects, broken glass, rusted metal, singed fur. The candles extinguished themselves with a hiss, plunging the room into darkness. I lay on the floor, gasping for air, my body trembling uncontrollably. Every inch of me ached, as though I had been stretched across an invisible rack. The metallic taste lingered in my mouth, and when I touched my chest, my fingers came away sticky with blood. My shirt was torn, and beneath it, a fresh wound pulsed faintly, a jagged line that matched the shape of one of Blackwood's symbols. The house settled into an eerie stillness, but it wasn't peace. It felt like the calm after a storm, a brief pause before something worse arrived. The whispers were gone, replaced by a deafening silence that pressed against my ears. Even the grandfather clock remained silent, its hands frozen at 3:37 a.m. For the first time since moving in, there was no creak of settling wood, no distant hum of electricity. The house seemed empty, too empty, but I knew better. The ritual hadn't banished the entity. It had only weakened it, and in doing so, I had marked myself. The tendril of darkness that had ripped from my chest hadn't vanished. It had become part of the house, binding me to this place in ways I couldn't yet comprehend. I could feel it now, a faint echo of the entity's presence lingering in the walls, watching, waiting. Exhaustion overwhelmed me, and I drifted in and out of consciousness. When I woke, weak sunlight filtered through the cracks in the shattered windows. The study looked different, smaller, somehow, as if the house had shrunk overnight. The artifacts were gone, reduced to dust that scattered across the warped floorboards. My journal lay open on the desk, its pages blank except for a single sentence written in my own handwriting. It will come back. I stumbled to my feet, every movement sending waves of pain through my body. My reflection in the cracked mirror above the fireplace was unrecognizable, hollow-eyed, pale, and gaunt. But worse than my appearance was the shadow behind me. It didn't belong to me. It shifted independently, flickering like smoke caught in a draft. When I turned to look directly at it, it dissolved into nothingness, but I could still feel its weight pressing against my back. The rest of the house felt wrong. Rooms I'd explored countless times seemed unfamiliar, their dimensions subtly altered. The staircase leading to the basement was gone, replaced by a solid wall. Yet I could hear faint sounds coming from behind it, scratching like claws against stone, accompanied by a low, rhythmic thumping that matched the beat of my heart. The metallic smell was stronger here, clinging to the air like a fog. Mrs. Hargrove appeared at the front door just as I was packing my belongings. Her face was pale, her hands trembling as she clutched her purse. "You shouldn't have stayed this long," she whispered, glancing over her shoulder as though afraid someone or something might be watching. "No one ever does. Not once they see what's inside." I said, my voice hoarse, and I tried to stop it. Her eyes widened, and she took a step back. "You don't understand. You can't stop it. That thing, it feeds on fear, on despair. Every time someone fights it, they make it stronger. Ezekiel Blackwood thought he could control it, but all he did was give a home. And now," she trailed off, looking past me into the depths of the house. "Now it has you." Her words sent a chill down my spine, but I forced myself to keep moving. I couldn't stay here. Whatever temporary reprieve the ritual had granted wouldn't last. The house was already stirring again, its walls humming faintly, its shadows lengthening despite the morning light. I grabbed my suitcase and headed for the door, but Mrs. Hargrove blocked my path. "You need to leave everything behind," she said urgently. "Anything you take with you, it'll follow. Trust me, I've seen it happen before." Her gaze fell on the teddy bear, lying forgotten on the floor near the study's entrance. Its fur had grown impossibly long overnight, spilling across the room like a dark tide. One of its button eyes was missing, leaving a black void that seemed to stare straight through me. Reluctantly, I set down my suitcase and emptied its contents onto the floor. Clothes, books, even my phone, I left them all behind. The house seemed to sigh in satisfaction, the air growing heavier as if it were savoring my surrender. As I stepped outside, the front gate creaked shut behind me with finality. For a moment, I thought I was free. Then I heard it, the whisper, faint, almost indistinguishable from the wind, but unmistakably there. "Thank you," it said, using my voice. I spun around, but the house stood silent and still, its windows reflecting the morning sun. No one was watching from inside. No one except me, because when I glanced at the upstairs window, I saw my reflection staring back, and it smiled. I ran, not toward my car, not toward safety, but simply away from the house, my legs pumping with a desperation that bordered on panic. The road stretched endlessly before me, flanked by towering oak trees whose branches clawed at the sky. Each step felt heavier than the last, as though the house were trying to pull me back, its influence reaching far beyond its physical boundaries. Behind me, the whispers grew louder, overlapping voices chanting in languages I couldn't understand. They weren't coming from the house anymore. They were inside my head, crawling through my thoughts like insects. I clapped my hands over my ears, but the sound persisted, vibrating through my skull. The metallic smell followed me too, clinging to my skin and clothes, mixing with the cold sweat that drenched my body. Mrs. Hargrove's warning echoed in my mind. "Anything you take with you, it'll follow." Was that why the whispers wouldn't stop? Had I unknowingly carried something out of the house? My pockets were empty, but the ache in my chest reminded me of the wound left by the ritual. Maybe that was enough. Maybe the house didn't need physical objects to bind me to it. The world around me began to warp. The road twisted unnaturally, curving back on itself despite appearing straight moments before. The trees leaned closer, their gnarled roots breaking through the asphalt as if reaching for me. Shadows moved between them, fleeting shapes that disappeared when I tried to focus on them. The air thickened, making each breath feel like inhaling wet cement. I stumbled into the convenience store 2 blocks away, nearly knocking over a display of canned goods. The young clerk looked up from his phone, startled. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice muffled as though I were underwater. I opened my mouth to respond, but no words came out. Instead, I heard laughter, not mine, not human, echoing from somewhere deep within the store. The fluorescent lights flickered erratically, casting strobe-like flashes across the aisles. Shelves rattled, jars of pickles and jam trembling on their shelves. A radio in the corner crackled to life, playing static-filled snippets of music and voices speaking in tongues. The clerk backed away slowly, his eyes wide with terror. "Not again," he muttered under his breath. "Please, not again." Something brushed against my leg, a cold, slimy sensation that made me recoil. Looking down, I saw nothing, but the floor tiles bore faint scorch marks in the shape of footprints. They led toward the back of the store, where a narrow hallway ended in a locked door marked employees only. The whispers coalesced into a single voice, rasping in my ear. Open it. No. I whispered, shaking my head. I won't. The laughter returned, louder this time, accompanied by the sound of splintering wood. The locked door shuddered violently, its frame cracking as whatever was on the other side tried to break through. The clerk screamed and bolted for the exit, leaving me alone. I backed away, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. The scorch marks on the floor glowed faintly, pulsing in time with the rhythm of the whispers. Suddenly, the front windows exploded inward, showering the store with shards of glass. An icy wind swept through, extinguishing the flickering lights and plunging the space into darkness. The temperature plummeted, frost spreading across the countertops and shelves. My breath missed in the air, forming words I couldn't read but somehow understood. Come back. I bolted for the door, slipping on the frost-covered floor. Outside, the streetlights flickered wildly, casting distorted shadows that danced across the pavement. The house loomed in the distance, its silhouette darker than the night sky. Despite the chaos, it seemed almost serene, waiting patiently for my return. Mrs. Hargrove stood at the edge of the driveway, her figure illuminated by the erratic glow of the streetlights. She held something in her hands, a small wooden box carved with intricate patterns. When she saw me, she thrust it toward me without a word. Take it, she urged. Quickly. What is it? I panted, hesitating. It's a containment vessel, she explained hurriedly, made by the same people who helped Blackwood. If you can trap even a fragment of that thing inside, you might buy yourself some time, but you have to act fast. Before I could respond, a deafening roar split the air. The ground trembled beneath my feet, and the trees swayed violently, their branches snapping like whips. From the shadows emerged figures, twisted, grotesque versions of the families I'd seen in the photographs, their mouths open impossibly wide, emitting screams that pierced my eardrums. Clutching the box, I sprinted toward the nearest alley, dodging the grasping hands of the apparitions. The whispers grew deafening, urging me to stop, to turn back, to give in. My vision blurred, and I tripped over a loose cobblestone, landing hard on the pavement. Pain shot through my palms as they scraped against the rough surface, but I forced myself to keep moving. At the end of the alley, I found a storm drain partially obscured by weeds. Without hesitation, I dropped the box into the opening and slammed the grate shut. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, a blinding flash of green light erupted from the drain, followed by an unearthly shriek that seemed to shake the very foundations of the earth. The apparitions froze mid-step, their forms dissolving into smoke before vanishing entirely. When the light faded, silence descended, a fragile, unnatural quiet that made my skin crawl. The streetlights steadied, their glow soft and steady. The frost melted away, leaving puddles that reflected the stars above. Breathing heavily, I leaned against the wall, clutching my wounded chest. The ache had dulled slightly, but the sense of being watched remained. Mrs. Hargrove approached cautiously, her expression unreadable. Did it work? She asked softly. I don't know, I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. But we're not done. That thing, she nodded grimly. Yes, and now it knows you can fight back. Be careful, dear, very careful. As she walked away, I realized I was trembling, not from fear, but from anger. Anger at the house, at Blackwood, at whatever ancient evil had chosen me as its next victim. I wouldn't let it win. Not yet, not ever. The days that followed blurred together in a haze of paranoia and exhaustion. I rented a cheap motel room on the outskirts of town, avoiding the main roads and sticking to back alleys whenever possible. Sleep eluded me. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the void from the basement, felt its hungry gaze probing my mind. My reflection in the bathroom mirror showed dark circles under my eyes that refused to fade, no matter how much coffee I drank or how many cold showers I took. The wound on my chest throbbed constantly, a dull ache that intensified whenever I passed certain intersections or buildings. It was as if the town itself carried echoes of the house's malevolence, invisible threads connecting every structure to 43 Blackwood Lane. Streetlights flickered when I walked beneath them, and dogs barked incessantly as I passed their yards. Even the weather seemed to respond to my presence. Clouds gathering overhead, winds picking up speed, rain falling in sudden bursts that soaked me to the bone. I tried to piece together what had happened, writing everything down in a new notebook purchased at a gas station miles away from the house. The act of recording events felt cathartic, but the words often rearranged themselves on the page, forming sentences I hadn't written. "It's still here," they would say, or "you can't escape." Once, I found an entire paragraph written in reverse, detailing memories I didn't recall experiencing, walking to the house at night, hearing children laughing in the attic, standing at the threshold of the basement, and feeling something brush against my mind. Mrs. Hargrove visited me twice, bringing food and updates about the house. According to her, no one had dared approach it since I fled. The neighbors whispered about strange occurrences, the sound of footsteps echoing from within, lights flickering in empty rooms, a faint metallic smell wafting through the air on calm nights. She warned me not to return, but her warnings carried a note of resignation, as though she already knew I would. One evening, while channel surfing in the motel room, I stumbled upon a local news report. A family had gone missing 3 towns over. Their house discovered empty save for strange symbols drawn in salt on the floors. The reporter mentioned similarities to cases dating back decades, including the disappearance of the Thompson family. As the camera panned over the abandoned home, I recognized the architectural style, Victorian, with a wraparound porch and stained glass windows. My stomach churned as I switched off the TV. Unable to sit still, I wandered the streets, searching for answers I wasn't sure existed. The library proved useless. Mr. Whitmore avoided eye contact and claimed all records related to Blackwood House had been misplaced. The police department offered little more than vague condolences and assurances that they were looking into it. Desperation drove me to visit psychics, mediums, anyone who might provide insight into what I'd unleashed. Most dismissed me as delusional, but one elderly woman, her storefront hidden in a crumbling strip mall, listened intently before handing me a business card. Dr. Evelyn Marlowe. It read, Paranormal Research Consultant. Beneath her name was a quote, asterisk, where science fails, curiosity must prevail. Asterisk, her office was tucked away in a nondescript building downtown, its entrance marked only by a discreet brass plaque. Inside, the space was cluttered but organized, shelves lined with books, journals, and peculiar artifacts, a jar containing what looked like a preserved hand, a framed photograph of a Victorian-era asylum, a music box identical to one from a house. Dr. Marlowe herself was younger than I expected, her sharp features framed by short-cropped hair streaked with silver. "You've encountered something old," she said after listening to my story. "Older than the house, older than Blackwood. It wears masks, takes forms designed to terrify, but it's not invincible. Every prison has weaknesses." She handed me a folder filled with research notes, newspaper clippings, and sketches of sigils. These are accounts of similar phenomena throughout history. Patterns emerge if you know where to look. Certain materials repel it. Iron, salt, rowan wood. Certain phrases weaken it, though they vary depending on the region. And then there's this. She pointed to a diagram of a spiral pattern surrounded by runes. A containment circle. Temporary but effective. I studied materials obsessively, memorizing sigils and practicing incantations until my throat burned. The motel room became my laboratory, its walls covered in notes and drawings. I tested theories late into the night, burning herbs, tracing symbols on the floor, reciting passages in languages I didn't fully understand. Sometimes the experiments worked. The whispers grew quieter, the shadows retreated, but never for long. Always, the house called to me, its pull becoming harder to resist. During one particularly restless night, I ventured out to the storm drain where I'd trapped the fragment. The wooden box was gone, but the grate bore fresh scorch marks, and the surrounding concrete was cracked as if something had tried to break free. Kneeling beside it, I placed my hand on the metal and closed my eyes. Immediately I felt it, The same presence in the basement, weaker but still aware. It spoke without words, conveying emotions rather than sentences. Hunger, frustration, anticipation. "You're not done with me?" I whispered. Its response was immediate, a surge of energy that sent me sprawling backward. When I opened my eyes, the drain was steaming, tendrils of vapor rising like smoke signals. In the distance, church bells tolled midnight, their chimes discordant and uneven. The metallic smell returned, stronger than ever, and I knew I had to leave before it followed me home. Back at the motel, I packed my belongings, stuffing notebooks and protective charms into a duffel bag. The room felt smaller than before, its corners darker, its shadows deeper. As I reached for the doorknob, I noticed something etched into the mirror above the dresser. Words, written in condensation. "Run." So I did. But even as I drove away, heading toward destinations unknown, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The rear view mirror showed an empty road behind me, but in my peripheral vision, I caught glimpses of movement. Shapes shifting between the trees, headlights flickering in the distance. The whispers followed too, softer now but persistent, like a radio tuned to a station just out of range. And then there was the ache in my chest, constant and unrelenting. It wasn't fading. It was spreading, branching out like roots digging deeper into soil. Whatever I had taken from the house, whatever piece of the entity now lived inside me, it wasn't leaving, not anytime soon. Chapter 11. The journey took me hundreds of miles from Blackwood Lane, across state lines, and into towns whose names I barely registered. I stopped only when necessary. Gas stations, diners, motels paid for in cash. Each new location brought a fleeting sense of relief, but it never lasted. The house's influence lingered, manifesting in subtle ways. A door left ajar when I was certain I had closed it, a cold spot in the corner of a room, the faint scent of damp earth and metal clinging to my clothes. In a small town nestled in the Appalachian foothills, I found temporary refuge in a boarding house run by an elderly couple named Ruth and Harold. Their home was modest but welcoming, filled with a comforting aroma of baked bread and lavender sachets. At first, they seemed oblivious to my unease, chalking up to travel fatigue or personal tragedy. But Ruth, with her sharp eyes and gentle demeanor, eventually confronted me one evening as I sat alone on the porch, staring at the horizon. "You've got that look," she said, settling into the chair beside me, "like you're waiting for something bad to happen." I wanted to deny it, to laugh it off, but the truth spilled out instead. Not everything, just enough to explain the bags under my eyes, the way I flinch at sudden noises, the habit of checking locks multiple times before bed. Ruth listened silently, her knitting needles clicking rhythmically in the background. When I finished, she nodded slowly, as if confirming a suspicion she'd harbored all along. "There's a man who comes through here sometimes," she said after a pause. "Drives an old blue truck, wears a hat that looks like it's seen better days, calls himself Gabriel. He doesn't talk much, but he knows things. About houses, about spirits, about stuff most folks don't want to believe." Gabriel arrived 2 days later, his truck rumbling into the driveway just as dusk settled over the valley. He was younger than I expected, maybe mid-30s, with weathered features and a quiet intensity that made me instinctively wary. His eyes scanned the property before landing on me, pinning me in place with an unsettling directness. Ruth introduced us briefly, then excused herself, leaving us alone on the porch. Gabriel didn't waste time on pleasantries. "Ruth says you've got trouble following you," he said, leaning against the railing. His voice was low and gravelly, carrying the weight of someone who'd seen too much and spoken too little. I nodded, gripping the arms of my chair tightly. "More than I can handle." He studied me for a long moment, his gaze lingering on the faint outline of the wound beneath my shirt. "That mark, it's not just a scar. Whatever you tangle with, it's still inside you, feeding off you, growing." My stomach churned. "Can it be removed?" Gabriel shook his head. "Not completely. Not without killing you in the process. But it can be contained. Managed. For a while, anyway." He pulled a small leather pouch from a jacket pocket and tossed it to me. Inside were several items: a vial of clear liquid, a shard of black obsidian, a bundle of dried herbs tied with red string, salt water for cleansing, obsidian for protection, herbs for grounding. Start small, build your defenses. Over the next week, Gabriel taught me rituals designed to reinforce barriers between myself and the entity. We worked in the woods behind Ruth and Harold's property, where the dense canopy muted external sounds and amplified the natural energy of the land. He showed me how to carve protective sigils into tree trunks, how to use the obsidian shard to deflect negative energies, how to mix the herbs with salt to create wards that glowed faintly in moonlight. But progress came at a cost. Each ritual drained me physically and emotionally, leaving me hollow and raw. The entity fought back, manifesting in increasingly aggressive ways, knocking over furniture, freezing water pipes, causing electrical devices to malfunction. During one particularly intense session, I collapsed to my knees, clutching my chest as searing pain radiated outward. Gabriel caught me before I hit the ground, his grip firm but gentle. "It knows what you're doing," he said grimly. "It's testing you, pushing back. You need to decide how far you're willing to go." The question haunted me. How much was I willing to sacrifice to keep the entity at bay, to protect others from what I'd unleashed? The answer terrified me because I already knew everything. If it meant preventing another family from disappearing, another house from becoming a prison, I would endure any amount of pain, any level of isolation. But even as I resolved to continue, doubt crept in. Was I fighting for redemption or revenge? One night, unable to sleep, I wandered into the woods alone. The moon hung low in the sky, casting silver light through the trees. I traced the sigils Gabriel had taught me onto the bark of an ancient oak, murmuring incantations under my breath. As I worked, the air grew heavy, charged with static electricity. Shadows lengthened unnaturally, pooling at the base of the trees like spilled ink. And then I saw it, a figure standing at the edge of the clearing, silhouetted against the moonlight, tall, impossibly thin, with too many joints bending in impossible directions. Its skin shimmered like liquid mercury, reflecting everything and nothing at the same time. The entity had come for me. It didn't attack immediately. Instead, it tilted its head, studying me with eyes that weren't eyes. Memories flooded my mind, images of the house, of Blackwood, of the families trapped within its walls. But there was something else too, a glimpse of what waited beyond the void, a vast emptiness teeming with shapes and sounds that defied comprehension. The entity wasn't just a prisoner. It was a guardian, tasked with keeping something far worse contained. Gabriel's voice broke through the vision. "Step back!" he shouted, rushing toward me with a lit torch in one hand and a dagger in the other. The entity recoiled, its form flickering like a dying flame. Together, we drove it back, reinforcing the wards until the clearing hummed with protective energy. As dawn broke, Gabriel knelt beside me, his face pale but determined. "You need to understand something," he said quietly. "This isn't over. Not for you. Not for anyone. That thing, it's connected to you now. And it's not the only one." Chapter 12. Echoes Remain. The drive away from the boarding house was the hardest decision I'd ever made, yet it felt inevitable. Gabriel's words lingered in my mind like a death knell. Asterisk. It's not the only one. Asterisk, the implication was. The journey took me hundreds of miles from Blackwood Lane, across state lines, and into towns whose names I barely registered. I stopped only when necessary. Gas stations, diners, motels paid for in cash. Each new location brought a fleeting sense of relief, but it never lasted. The house's influence lingered, manifesting in subtle ways. A door left ajar when I was certain I'd closed it, a cold spot in the corner of a room, the faint scent of damp earth and metal clinging to my clothes. In a small town nestled in the Appalachian foothills, I found temporary refuge in a boarding house run by an elderly couple named Ruth and Harold. Their home was modest but welcoming, filled with a comforting aroma of baked bread and lavender sachets. At first, they seemed oblivious to my unease, chalking up to travel fatigue or personal tragedy. But Ruth, with her sharp eyes and gentle demeanor, eventually confronted me one evening as I sat alone on the porch, staring at the horizon. "You've got that look," she said, settling into the chair beside me. like you're waiting for something bad to happen. I wanted to deny it, to laugh it off, but the truth spilled out instead. Not everything. Just enough to explain the bags under my eyes, the way I flinch at sudden noises, the habit of checking locks multiple times before bed. Ruth listened silently, her knitting needles clicking rhythmically in the background. When I finished, she nodded slowly, as if confirming a suspicion she'd harbored all along. "There's a man who comes through here sometimes," she said after a pause. "Drives an old blue truck. Wears a hat that looks like it's seen better days. Calls himself Gabriel. He doesn't talk much, but he knows things. About houses, about spirits, about stuff most folks don't want to believe." Gabriel arrived 2 days later, his truck rumbling into the driveway just as dusk settled over the valley. He was younger than I expected, maybe mid-30s, the weathered features and a quiet intensity that made me instinctively wary. His eyes scanned the property before landing on me, pinning me in place with an unsettling directness. Ruth introduced us briefly, then excused herself, leaving us alone on the porch. Gabriel didn't waste time on pleasantries. "Ruth says you've got trouble following you," he said, leaning against the railing. His voice was low and gravelly, carrying the weight of someone who'd seen too much and spoken too little. I nodded, gripping the arms of my chair tightly, more than I can handle. He studied me for a long moment, his gaze lingering on the faint outline of the wound beneath my shirt. "That mark, it's not just a scar. Whatever you tangle with, it's still inside you, feeding off you, growing." My stomach churned. "Can be removed?" Gabriel shook his head. "Not completely. Not without killing you in the process. But it can be contained. Managed. For a while, anyway." He pulled a small leather pouch from a jacket pocket and tossed it to me. Inside were several items: a vial of clear liquid, a shard of black obsidian, a bundle of dried herbs tied with red string, salt water for cleansing, obsidian for protection, herbs for grounding. Start small. Build your defenses. Over the next week, Gabriel taught me rituals designed to reinforce barriers between myself and the entity. We worked in the woods behind Ruth and Harold's property, where the dense canopy muted external sounds and amplified the natural energy of the land. He showed me how to carve protective sigils into tree trunks, how to use the obsidian shard to deflect negative energies, how to mix the herbs with salt to create wards that glowed faintly in moonlight. But progress came at a cost. Each ritual drained me physically and emotionally, leaving me hollow and raw. The entity fought back, manifesting in increasingly aggressive ways, knocking over furniture, freezing water pipes, causing electrical devices to malfunction. During one particularly intense session, I collapsed to my knees, clutching my chest as searing pain radiated outward. Gabriel caught me before I hit the ground, his grip firm but gentle. "It knows what you're doing," he said grimly. "It's testing you, pushing back. You need to decide how far you're willing to go." The question haunted me. How much was I willing to sacrifice to keep the entity at bay, to protect others from what I'd unleashed? The answer terrified me because I already knew everything. If it meant preventing another family from disappearing, another house from becoming a prison, I would endure any amount of pain, any level of isolation. But even as I resolved continue, doubt crept in. Was I fighting for redemption or revenge? One night, unable to sleep, I wandered into the woods alone. The moon hung low in the sky, casting silver light through the trees. I traced the sigils Gabriel had taught me onto the bark of an ancient oak, murmuring incantations under my breath. As I worked, the air grew heavy, charged with static electricity. Shadows lengthened unnaturally, pooling at the base of the trees like spilled ink. And then I saw it, a figure standing at the edge of the clearing, silhouetted against the moonlight, tall, impossibly thin, with too many joints bending in impossible directions. Its skin shimmered like liquid mercury, reflecting everything and nothing at the same time. The entity had come for me. It didn't attack immediately. Instead, it tilted its head, studying me with eyes that weren't eyes. Memories flooded my mind, images of the house of Blackwood, of the families trapped within its walls. But there was something else too, a glimpse of what waited beyond the void, a vast emptiness teeming with shapes and sounds that defied comprehension. The entity wasn't just a prisoner. It was a guardian, tasked with keeping something far worse contained. Gabriel's voice broke through the vision. "Step back!" he shouted, rushing toward me with a lit torch in one hand and a dagger in the other. The entity recoiled, its form flickering like a dying flame. Together, we drove it back, reinforcing the wards until a clearing hummed with protective energy. As dawn broke, Gabriel knelt beside me, his face pale but determined. "You need to understand something," he said quietly. "This isn't over. Not for you. Not for anyone. That thing, it's connected to you now. And it's not the only one." Chapter 12. Echoes Remain. The drive away from the boarding house was the hardest decision I'd ever made, yet it felt inevitable. Gabriel's words lingered in my mind like a death knell. Asterisk. It's not the only one. Asterisk, the implication was. Clear. If the entity haunting me was merely a guardian, then what horrors lurked beyond its watch? What other prisons existed, maintained by desperate souls who didn't realize they were complicit in something far greater? I drove aimlessly at first, letting instincts guide me down winding roads and through sleepy towns. The farther I traveled, the more I noticed patterns. Houses with boarded-up windows, streets lined with iron fences, churches with bells that tolled irregularly. Each location carried a faint resonance, a vibration that resonated with the ache in my chest. The entity wasn't dormant. It was mapping, cataloging, preparing for something I couldn't yet comprehend. In a diner off Interstate 70, I met Clara. She was older than me, her hair streaked with gray, her hands calloused from years of manual labor. We struck up a conversation about nothing in particular, weather, road conditions, the declining quality of coffee, but something in her eyes told me she understood loss. When I mentioned passing through Blackwood Lane weeks earlier, her spoon clattered against her saucer, and she leaned closer, lowering her voice. "You don't want to mess with places like that," she said, glancing around as if afraid someone might overhear. "They change people, twist them. My sister lived in a house like that once. Said it talked to her, told her things no one should know." She paused, rubbing her temples. "Last I heard, she ran off screaming about shadows eating her soul." Her story resonated too deeply to dismiss. I shared fragments of my own experience, careful not to reveal too much. Clara listened intently, nodding occasionally as if piecing together a puzzle. When I finished, she slid a folded piece of paper across the table. "If you're looking for answers, start here," she said cryptically. On the paper was an address in Chicago and a name, Dr. Samuel Pritchard. Chicago proved overwhelming. Its skyline a jagged contrast to the rural landscapes I'd grown accustomed to. The address led me to a nondescript office building, its lobby sterile and impersonal. Dr. Pritchard's suite was tucked away on the 15th floor, accessible only via a keycard elevator. The waiting room was empty save for a receptionist who barely glanced up from her computer screen. Moments later, a door clicked open and a tall, gaunt man with piercing blue eyes gestured for me to enter. His office was a shrine to obsession. Walls covered in maps dotted with pushpins, shelves crammed with journals and manuscripts, a corkboard overflowing with photographs and newspaper clippings. At the center of it all was a map of the United States, its surface crisscrossed with red lines forming a complex web. "You're not the first," he said without preamble, gesturing toward the map. "These are locations where similar phenomena have been reported. Houses, buildings, entire neighborhoods imbued with something, guardians, as you call them, prison keepers." He tapped a pin near Chicago. "This one's active. Been causing trouble for decades. Authorities chalk it up to gang violence or drug wars, but it's something else entirely." He handed me a folder thicker than any I'd seen before. Inside were case files, witness statements, autopsy reports, all pointing to a pattern I couldn't ignore. Entire families vanishing without a trace. Structures collapsing under mysterious circumstances. Survivors driven mad by visions they couldn't explain. Each incident bore hallmarks of what I'd experienced. The whispers, the cold spots, the metallic smell. "You've got a choice to make," Dr. Pritchard said, leaning back in his chair. "Walk away. Live your life knowing what's out there, but choosing not to engage. or join the fight. Help us track these entities, contain them, understand them. It's dangerous work, and it'll cost you everything. Friends, family, peace of mind. But if you walk away, someone else will take your place. Someone less prepared. I stare at the map, at the red lines converging like veins feeding into a heart. Somewhere out there, others were fighting battles they didn't fully understand. Others were running, hiding, hoping the shadows wouldn't find them. And somewhere, perhaps in a house much like Blackwood Lane, another Ezekiel Blackwood was making deals he couldn't possibly comprehend. The ache in my chest pulsed, a reminder of the bond one couldn't sever. The whispers returned, soft and now but insistent, urging me forward. Gabriel's lessons echoed in my mind alongside Mrs. Hargrove's warnings. Ruth's kindness, Clara's desperation. Each voice added weight to the decision looming before me. As I stepped out of the office building, the city buzzed with life around me. Horns honked. Pedestrians hurried past. Skyscrapers gleamed in the afternoon sun. Yet beneath the veneer of normalcy, I sensed the pulse of something ancient, patient, and hungry. The shadows lengthened as dusk approached, pooling in alleyways and stretching across rooftops. Somewhere a child laughed, a sound both innocent and chilling. I climbed into my car, gripping the steering wheel tightly. The folder sat on the passenger seat, its contents heavy with implications. Behind me, the office building's windows reflected the setting sun, but one pane remained dark, opaque. As I drove away, I swore I saw a figure standing there, watching me leave. Too tall, too thin, with too many joints bending in impossible directions. The road ahead stretched endlessly, promising neither salvation nor destruction. Only choices, only consequences.